You're right. Uh, yes. My name is Joris Hoekstra. I work for Delft University of Technology, and together with Martina, who you have just met, we coordinate the Uplift work package on policy co-creation with young people, on which we will present the results today. I would also like to give a warm welcome to Professor Truijsteen from the University of Leuven. She's an expert on public governance and co-production of public services. And in the second part of the seminar, she will reflect on the findings of our research project. So thank you very much for joining us, Professor Steen. Before I will present the program of this session, I think it's good to first say a couple of words about the Uplift project in general. Uplift is a European Horizon 2020 a research project that tries to explore how young people's voices can be put at the center in the field of youth policy in areas of housing, education, and employment. We are almost at the end of the project. The project started 3.5 years ago, and it will end by the end of June. And yeah, we have a very nice consortium of 15 international partners coming from universities, but also from independent research organizations, local municipalities, service providers that have worked together on this very nice project. As every European project, we have a work package structure with 4 content-related work packages. And yeah, in this structure, actually, we went down from the general level to the implementation level. So we started with an analysis on the national and regional scale. That's work package 1, a quantitative data analysis, literature review. And then in the subsequent work packages, we went down to the level of urban areas. And for a total of 16 European urban areas, we have carried out a policy analysis with the help of expert interviews. 8 of these 16 cities were also subject to in-depth interviews with young people. So there we carried out 40 in-depth live course interviews with young people to talk about their experiences and problems, and that really yielded very interesting results. And in just 4 urban areas, we did what we call the full package. So policy analysis, in-depth interviews, but also policy co-creation with young people. And today's findings are mainly about what happened in those 4 urban areas. So this map shows all 16 urban areas that were investigated in the project. And the policy co-creation process took place in 4 of them. Baracaldo in the north of Spain, Svanta Georgia in Romania, Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, and Tallinn in Estonia. So the presenters of today will also come from each of these 4 cities. In the different cities, the focus of the policy co-creation process was a bit different, also because the problems that young people are experiencing are different in the various cities. In Svanta Georgia, the focus was on improving the education system. In Tallinn, the focus was mainly on improving the services that are provided to young people that are not in education and employment, the so-called need youth. And in Amsterdam and Baracaldo, we have a very tight housing market with a lot of accessibility and affordability problems for young people. So there the focus was on housing. So more in general, you may wonder, why do we focus on young people after all? I think there are a number of good reasons for that. First of all, we see that not all young people, but quite a lot of young people are struggling on the housing market and on the labor market. And actually the whole idea that younger generations will automatically get a better life than their parents does not seem to hold anymore. Also based on our in-depth interviews, we have seen that in many instances, the social mobility of young people is difficult to achieve, and some people are actually trapped in quite a vulnerable situation. We also see that there's kind of a disconnection between the current support measures provided by the government and the NGOs and yeah, and the needs and also the information that young people have. So very often young people do not know what support measures are available. And even if they know, they perhaps do not trust the government or the formal institutions because they have had bad experiences with them. And also, yeah, measures do not always seem to connect well. They are not tailored to the heterogeneous needs of the young people themselves. So yeah, quite some disbalances that we came across in our project. Well, participation can be at least a partial solution for these problems, but yeah, we also experienced that let's say the most participatory structures that are in place, they do not reach the young people, particularly the more vulnerable young people. They are not attractive for their target group. So a lot of participation takes place with all the people, with insiders in the system, and much less so with vulnerable young people. So yeah, it was a big challenge for us to try to find a way to really involve those people in policy making. Yeah, we have tried to do that with the help of an approach which we call reflexive policy making. And that approach has, yeah, let's say, 4 main characteristics. So the basic idea is that policies are made with the young people themselves rather than for them. So it's a bottom-up way of policy making rather than a top-down way of policy making. Yeah, and we also thought that you can only work in such a way if a group of young people is really structurally involved in the participation process. It should not just be incidental meeting, but really a long-term structural process. And in order to make that possible, we have worked with the so-called youth board at all 4 locations. And the youth board is a diverse and inclusive group of young people that structurally worked on co-creation of new policies. Of course, the youth side is one side of the coin. It can only work if policymakers and professionals are receptive and committed to this new way of working. So that's also something in which we invested a lot of time and effort to get policymakers and professionals on board in our reflexive policy making process. And more information on how to do that will follow in the individual presentations that come later. And the end of the reflexive policy making process is what we call a reflexive policy agenda, which is a set of recommendations that aim to increase, and here it put the changes, but it should be the life chances of young people. And then, of course, we hoped that it would not just end with a policy agenda, but that policy agenda will also have the potential to be implemented and really to be put in practice. So basically, there are four phases in this process. First of all, it's very important to prepare a good stakeholder network with committed stakeholders. The second challenge is setting up a youth board. Like I said, it's not always easy to connect to young people nowadays, and certainly not to get them committed for a longer time period. And also to do that with an inclusive group of young people and not just with higher educated ones, for example. So setting up a youth board was a second challenge. Then, of course, we have the co-creation process in itself, working with the youth board, but also interaction between youth board and policy makers, how to prepare the youth board for that interaction, how to prepare them for the co-creation process. So there was quite a lot of capacity building involved. And last but not least, we looked at implementation possibilities. And at the end of the project, which is the phase we are also very much interested in evaluating the impact and the added value of it. So we have worked very hard on this for the last 3.5 years. And yeah, I think if we look back at the project, we can already see some nice impact. Some new policy initiatives were developed and also are on the way to implementation in all 4 locations. But I think what's equally valuable is that we have really learned a lot about how to do this, how to put this reflexive policy making process in practice. What works well, what works less well. Yeah, we really have learned a lot of practical insights about how to structure such a process. And in this seminar, yeah, we basically would like to share those insights with you. So not so much the content related outcomes, but more the methodological ones. And of course, we hope that, yeah, this may provide some inspiration, perhaps for some of the participants here, either academics or stakeholders that are also interested in in starting such a policy co-creation process with young people. So Martina already mentioned a little bit about the program, but we will start with 4 short presentations. First, presentation about the preparation of the stakeholder network, then presentation about setting up a youth board, presentation about capacity building and interaction, and last but not least, a presentation about implementation and added value. I think it's good that after each presentation, yeah, we have a very short time frame for burning questions, things that perhaps are not clear, not really for more general discussion questions that can come in the second part of the seminar, but more factual questions can be asked immediately after each presentation, just by raising your hand digitally or put something in the chat. So after the 4 presentations, and I think then it will be around 11 o'clock, we will have a short break. So you can take a coffee or go to the toilet, but also, yeah, we want to use that break to collect your input and questions for the moderated discussion that comes in the second part of the seminar. That discussion will kick off with the reflection and the comments from Professor Truije Steen. And after that, yeah, the floor is open for a discussion with inputs from all participants. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, to hear your ideas about what we have done and your suggestions perhaps for improvement, or your questions, or yeah, let's just have a very nice and open discussion on all these aspects. So that was my introduction. I guess there are no questions about this, so I propose to proceed with the first presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. So that would be Kerli, I think.
Yes, it's me. Thank you, Joris. And I shortly share my presentation. So, is it visible? Hello, I am Kerli Kõi from Estonia and representing here University of Tartu and Association of Estonian Open News Center. And my presentation focus is about preparation of stakeholder network. So the very first step on this co-creation process is setting up the stakeholder network. And it can be difficult phase because it depends on the project initiators, potential stakeholders, and the overall context, which can be very different in very different regions. But in some cases, it can be easy if the main implementer has some previous experiences, cooperation experiences with these stakeholders. And for example, in Tallinn case, the Association of Estonian Open News Center has been cooperation, especially in this need youth topic. So it made easier to invite different stakeholders to this process. But if there is missing this kind of previous contact and experiences, then must be more take more time to think about who they could be and whose input is important in this process. And choosing the stakeholders, it's important that we don't push these people and these institutions to this process. These institutions can be very different. It can be research institutions, community organizations, local governments, service providers, and the representatives from these organizations. But it's important that these people who take part of this co-creation process, that they are motivated. If there are some previous partnership and experiences, then it's maybe easier. But if you absolutely don't know these people, then we have in this project experience that some interviews were made, and during this process, the motivation were more clear, and people know more what means the co-creation process and where is their motivation. And it's very important that these people who take part of this process, they accept that young people are the experts of their life. They accept their needs and they meaningfully contribute to the policy development. Another very important question is, if we involve institutions, should we invite managers or executive staff? Of course, manager, they have much more authority to implement these co-creation process outcomes. But at the same time, the executive staff, they may be more experienced and more willing to engage with young people in an equal level. But of course, the ideal version is that we can involve both of them. Then the synergy is much better. But if not, then it's important that inside of this organization, the information flow is very clear and everyone understands what's going on. The manager expectations. There can be very different expectations from each organization which are involved to co-creation process. The commitment can be different, maybe the principles or understanding of co-creation can be different, and also maybe the understanding the need or the main focus of this project. And it's very important to take time to clarify all these things and take time to let people get better understanding of co-creation process. And this honest, open discussions in this period is very important. And it's made before the process or this actual work begins. And then action plan. In the project Uplift, we used different action plans for each location has their own action plans to manage all of these stakeholders' expectations. And action plan outlines the following, like strategy and actions that need to be taken, each partner's responsibility for the group creation process, and the timeline and plan to manage the full process. And it's very important, again, to understand that co-creation process is something that we don't know where it goes and what will be the result, because we are all the manager or the coordinator and participants are all on the same level and we don't know the result. But we must trust the process. We must trust the participants and their understanding of this process. And we must be ready to adapt if something will change. The budget is the question that should be clear. It should be clear, or it must be that people know where the money comes from this process, and not to be open about this information and not let to these financial things who is the sponsor to has impact of this process. So, and the coordinating, when choosing a model of process coordination, it must be keep in mind that what is the project specific, the number of and the type of institutional stakeholders, and how much they are experienced in this process. So to support everyone safe participation in this process, and this way that it's well coordinated, and keep in mind the main aim of this process. And in Uplift project, in all locations, we had also our own version of steering committee that acts as a safeguard for ensuring the integrity of the co-creation process, that to follow all this process. It's very important. And finally, the time factor. We need time. Even as I mentioned, that things can be changed during the process. That's why it's very important to understand the time frame, but be ready also some changes if it's needed. And also, if this process is the first one, then of course we need time to adapt all this working style. And it's important to create the safe space for everyone, where all doubts and difficulties can be expressed. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Carly, for your presentation. Like I said, we have some time for a short question, if there are questions. I don't see any hands raised or things in the chat, so then let's continue with the second presentation about how to set up a youth board. And then I would like to give the floor to the Swanto team.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see? Yes, okay. So my name is Gabriela Tong, and I represent the research partner in Romania, Supedito company. And I will present today the steps in the co-creation process regarding the setting up of the youth board. So I will address several aspects that we think that is important in the planning of, to consider in the planning of the process. So I will talk about the recruitment process, the size and the composition of the group, inclusiveness and gender sensitivity, vulnerability level of participants, and commitment strategies. In recruiting young people into this process, the role of the gatekeeper organizations and gatekeepers is extremely important. These are people or organizations such as community groups, schools, but also youth workers, social workers, teachers, NGOs that are already operate on the ground and have an existing relationship with the young adults. The more diverse the recruiting organizations are, the more heterogeneous the resulting group will be. However, it may be necessary to set up tailor-made strategies to reach specific demographics of, or groups that usually fall out of the reach of the institutional stakeholders and NGOs. Such groups can be, in Romania, for instance, members of Roma community who were never enrolled to school, or those who dropped out early, or those who lost or never had connections with official institutions. So in this sense, for peer recruitment is a great way to reaching out for young people that are not in touch with organizations, but preserve peer relations. For example, in Sfântu Gheorghe, we worked mainly through schools and teachers who promoted the Uplift project in their classrooms. But we also relied on peer-to-peer word of mouth, where young people who were already involved in the process could invite their friends to join. Another good example of the role of gatekeepers was in Baracaldo, where many of the participants were recruited among those who already benefited from the support program offered by the gatekeeper organization. Another strategy that was used in Amsterdam was the online media campaign, through which different target groups could be reached directly. Yes. Yes. However, we have to keep in mind that involving the most vulnerable groups, like segregated Roma or migrant communities, usually require additional investments in terms of resources and finances, time and experts. Specifically, recruitment and retention strategies are essential, and more usually, so we recommend a special preparatory phase in these cases. And for this, of course, a good field knowledge, a prior connection with the community is needed in order to achieve success in a relatively short time. So the preparatory process implies assessing and reassessing specific needs and necessary conditions for participation. And time should be reserved for community visits to maintain the participants in the process. So a closer relationship is needed usually in case of these communities. And field visits also serve to understand more the conditions, the situation in which some participants may be, and to tackle, for instance, problems like absenteeism, if you understand the motives of it. In terms of size and composition of the group, the number of participants in a youth board should not be too large in order to make cooperation among the members as easy as possible. So in our experience, a board around 10 people allows enough space and time for all participants to express their opinions. But it is also important not to overwhelm the participants and give them the possibility to be as involved as they want. For instance, in Amsterdam, the youth board had a double structure, a stable group of around 8 to 10 active and fully committed members who participated in all or nearly all the co-creation sessions, and a so-called youth pool, which was a larger group of 15 to 20 young people who have been involved less intensively and who participated in a limited number of co-creation sessions. Regarding the diversity of the group, youngsters with various backgrounds should have equal opportunities to participate, of course, and have their voices heard. For example, in Baracaldo, the group was composed of people from different origins, including young migrants, and people with different socio-economic backgrounds. And in Sfântu Gheorghe, the situation was the same. There was also a lot of diversity, with some participants going to vocational schools while others were already working. Participants with both urban and rural backgrounds, and also a percentage of youngsters who identified as Roma. However, a balanced gender and ethnic composition of the youth board does not automatically lead to gender and ethnically equal processes and solutions. So we need to assess how differences concerning gender and ethnic background could influence the participants' feeling of safety and empowerment and engagement. So facilitators should should have a focus on this aspect all the time, and should strive to make the discussions open and welcoming for all. Also, the resulting policy initiatives should take into account that youngsters with different genders or ethnic backgrounds may experience different problems and may therefore also need different solutions. So the diversity of the problems and the identified solutions should be priority. In terms of commitment, engaging and keeping the youngsters in the process, we learned that there are three levels that we need to focus on. So the first one is creating a safe and fun space in which the young people could feel free to express themselves, give their opinions, and learn. The second level is the quality of engagement between the group members, developing their skills and capabilities, exercising collaboration and representation in safe interactions. And three, transforming participation into a meaningful process in terms of results for young people, in terms of achieving tangible actions leading to changes in local policies in different fields. So what is a very common observation is that the conditions, the physical and human conditions, environment of the whole process is a very important agent in creating commitment. So here you see some of these aspects, creating a positive, safe and supportive atmosphere, comfortable meeting space, stability of the facilitators, stability in meetings, relatively frequent meetings adapted to the availability of the group members, involving all participants in turns in tasks, especially in representative tasks, according to their topics of interest, occasional facilitation by different group members. So group members can take over the role of the facilitator, assisted by the other facilitators, of course. Playfulness, shared meals, and using incentives. In Sfântu Gheorghe, for example, we used youth camps and participation in different events as incentives that worked very well. So these factors can increase the commitment of the participants. As we see, a diverse and empowered youth board is essential to achieve a successful co-creation. So investing time and resourcing in recruiting and retainment of young people is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your presentation. I see Ursula has already started her presentation, which is good. I think Julia's and Kerli's presentations clearly show that, yeah, starting a co-creation process requires quite a lot of preparation. It's not something you can do overnight, but also moderating the process in itself and getting the most out of it. It's a complex and challenging task. And Ursula will tell you more about this.
So yeah, can you hear me? No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yes, this is a very important phase for the co-creation process, and Claudia and me, the orchestra team, in this process, we have prepared this presentation on capacity building and interaction, summarizing what we have learned from the Uplift experience. So first of all, we have observed that capacity building and interaction is a crucial dimension for coordinating and moderating the co-creation process. So creating trust, respect, safety, that means like working on those issues, and internal cohesion among the participants. And it as also part of an empowering process of the participants, especially the youth, that can ultimately allow them to have effective agency during the process. That means to have or to increase their capacity to act on their own will, and also to enhance their understanding of the context and the dynamics of the problem that the co-creation process is somehow facing or tackling. So capacity building and interaction, what we learned from Applitis means focusing in the co-creation process in those 4 aspects I'm going to be presenting today. One is trust building and group forming. The second one is how to foster a good interaction between the young participants and the institutions. Third, how we face the capacity building within the co-creation process, and to enhance creativity and commitment throughout the process. So around trust building and group forming, what we have observed or seen is that it's a very important dimension at the initial stages of the co-creation process, but it should be a priority also throughout the process. So, for example, organizing icebreaking activities like small trips and social events might be very helpful. And for example, in Sfantu, Georgia, they organize a 3-day youth camp, as Julia was saying before, where the participants could learn leadership skills, how to present their ideas, and so on. And if these activities are planned together with the inputs of the young people, they feel that those haven't been imposed to them, which is a very crucial aspect as well. And also we found out that using social media and group chats can be very beneficial for group building. But the second question around trust building is, how do we build trust on our groups? So what we see is that like appointing youngster facilitator can be very beneficial as an important a person that a young people that or a young person that has knowledge, policy knowledge and institutional knowledge that can act as a bridge between the youth board members and the institutional stakeholders, and help them to find common grounds on the issues where both groups feel that are more distant. For example, in the Baracaldo team appointed one of its youngest research team members, who's actually Claudia, who is here today with us. And she acted as a contact point for the youth board members, and she played the role of encouraging youth board members playing a more active role during the sessions, and help them with the presentations. And also she reviewed the documentation to make sure that it was accessible for them to read, for young people. So when it comes to foster a good interaction between the youth board and the institutions, it's important to keep in mind the following aspects. First, that the space provided for interaction needs to feel safe enough for young people to express their needs and their opinions. And that means that the stakeholders needs to give a constructive feedback and avoiding being very judgmental or biased. And appointing moderators and having moderators in the process can be also very beneficial. Moderators are neutral people towards what's being tackled in the co-creation process. Maybe people from NGOs or academic institutions that do not have any stake in the process can be appointed as moderators. And also, as we were saying, like appointing a youngster facilitator can be also beneficial in terms of being the person that is translating the more policy language or the young the language that the young people uses, and so and facing a little bit the misunderstanding between both groups. And finally, we see that capacity building is a very important issue to be tackled, to be fostering this good interaction. And we have prepared a poll for the audience to ask to the audience on for whom do you think the capacity building efforts should be addressed to? So I don't think if it's possible. It's a very simple question. So do you think that it's addressing young people, or it needs to be addressing stakeholders, or both groups? So I will leave you like some seconds to answer. I think that let's see, what do we get for that? So yeah, I think it's enough. I don't know if we can see what people think on this question. Yeah, so yeah, as most of you have already guessed, thank you for answering. Capacity building. Oh, no, I can't change the slide, sorry. Yeah, the capacity building needs to be addressing all the participants in a co-creation process to become in a more fruitful process, but also with benefits for both groups, or for all the groups that are participating on the process. So in case of young people, and especially vulnerable young people, it's very important to provide them with like communication, listening, reflection, and presentation skills, so that they can engage in meaningful discussions with policymakers. And in addition to that, policy and institutional knowledge is a very important capacity that they could have the opportunity to learn. And those skills are not only important for the co-creation process, but beyond that, for their personal lives. So yeah, and also keep in mind that making this, let's say, this learning activities more interactive and engaging can lead to more effective learning experiences, according to our experience. For example, in Amsterdam, at the beginning of the process, the youth board members were offered an educational menu they could choose from the educational activities that were of their interest or their needs. And also about the stakeholders, regarding the stakeholders, it's very important to work on to work with them on how to be open to listen to the young people opinion and experiences, and also to work with them the fact that that young people can also be experts. I think that yeah, Curly was already mentioning that at the beginning of her intervention. So that's very important, that they become open to the idea that they can be very beneficial, and that the policy making can change for the better if they include the recipients of the policies in the co-creation process. So finally, and that brings us to the end, we found out that enhancing creativity and commitment is a very, very important issue to be working on during the co-creation process. And here we have identified different techniques and tools. For example, if the process is structured following the principles of design thinking, from problem diagnosis to solution seeking, maybe it can be very helpful, but also other techniques for organizing ideas and brainstorming, such as mind maps, can be very, very, very helpful, and conceptual tools for problem diagnosis. For instance, in Tallinn, they were using several of these techniques, such as work cafes, personality creation workshops, or roundtables. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Usue. I think your presentation clearly shows, that we have put quite a lot of effort in our co-creation process. So then, of course, it's important to know, is it worth the effort? What is the added value of the process? To what extent did it really lead to valuable and implementable outcomes? And I would like to give the floor to Martina to tell us more about that.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so thanks. My name is Martina Gentili. I'm a researcher at the Delft University of Technology, and I'm part of the Amsterdam team of the Uplift project. And now, after we've heard about how to involve the institutional stakeholders and to engage the young people in the capacity building and interaction, I will briefly talk about the last phase of the process, which is that of the implementation of the results of the co-creation, which is a very difficult phase because it's mostly out of our control. And before talking about implementation, it's necessary to first address what's the actual outcome of a policy co-creation process, which is basically a list of policy suggestions, what we in Uplift have called a reflexive policy agenda. And now the items on this agenda can range from very practical, small-scale measures to a series of suggestions for a much broader policy approach. And the scope of the agenda can also vary. It could be, for example, the improvement of existing policy tools or brand new policy tools for problems which are not yet addressed by current policy. For instance, the reflexive policy agenda that was developed in Spanto Gheorghe about how to improve education is broad, it's strategic, it's long-term oriented, but it also has some short-term implementation. So the long-term vision required changes in attitude and mentality over at least 2 generations. And in general, it aims to reduce the differences between schools at all levels and ensuring that all children are enrolled and stay in the educational system until at least the 10th grade. On the other hand, the short-term actions that can already be implemented are, for example, organizing a follow-up for the youth board or setting up some self-awareness groups in the schools or organizing reverse days where the pupils become the teachers, or monthly group activities like watching movies together or bringing up hot topics and then discussing them. And yeah, in Amsterdam, we did something similar. The youth board developed a general manifesto for youth housing, which was a comprehensive document with older, more structural and long-term policy suggestions for the municipality. And this document was presented to the Amsterdam Alderman for Housing to take into consideration when developing the new municipal housing strategy. But they also proposed some more, the youth board also proposed some more practical and short-term actions. Among these, for example, there was an online platform which was dedicated to providing clear and up-to-date and also easily accessible information on housing rights and housing opportunities for young people, so official information made accessible. And this is a tool that can be implemented right away and that has an immediate impact on the everyday reality of young people looking for housing. However, when co-creating a policy agenda and working towards its implementation, it's important to keep 3 things in mind. And this is important for researchers who are trying to work with participatory approaches, but also for all the people involved, both the institutional partners and the young people. So the things to remember is that system change is very hard to achieve, and then that the time horizon of policy implementation is a lot longer than that of policy co-creation. And finally, also that political compromise between many different interests is always necessary. Now, with regard to the first point, that system change is hard to achieve, it's important that youth board members especially understand that changing policies is something long and complex, where many different interests are at stake. And this should be clear to everyone from the beginning in order to manage expectations. However, we should not discourage the young people, and we ourselves should not be discouraged, because some small adjustments that do not require a systemic shift, like, for example, changing the attitudes of professionals or providing better information, can still have a significant and a positive impact on the life chances and on the well-being of young people. So clearly, changing the system is unrealistic, but the co-creation process can and should focus on improving the system, and in this way, actually providing agency to young people. Now, with regard to timing, we have to keep in mind that while a youth board may develop new proposals and recommendations in a relatively short time, like a year or even less, the decision-making about the implementation of the proposals and the implementation itself may actually take years. For example, one of the results of the co-creation process in Amsterdam was a housing concept for youth communal living. And currently, the housing association Leven de Kei is planning some new housing developments in Amsterdam West. And the new communal housing concept, which was developed by the youth board, could potentially be part of these plans. But it will actually take a few more years before these developments will take place. And also political compromise is always necessary. And despite the participatory nature of the reflexive policy agenda, this is not and will not ever be a legally binding or democratically agreed upon agenda. And as a consequence, it's very unlikely that all the proposals of the youth board will be adopted by the institutional stakeholders without any further modification. So when deciding about the implementation of this kind of participatory input, the interests of young people will probably be traded off against the interests of other groups or financial interests, very likely. It is crucial that the local public actors involved in any co-creation effort actually believe in the process and are committed to defend its results and to see them through. But it can often happen that they do not have the formal power to change the things that young people care the most about. Or it can happen that local actors have to negotiate that power with other higher governance levels or other local interests. So as a strategy for implementation, it's important to develop objectives that can have an impact on the local level and that can be implemented by the local involved partners. But on the other hand, local institutional partners, ideally together with the young people, can bring the more ambitious proposals to other more appropriate and more powerful tables, so they can lobby for change based on the results of the co-creation process. And both types of objectives fit well in a reflexive policy agenda. Now, having said this, implementation can happen. In all the 4 uplift locations, the local co-creation teams are working right now, still working to integrate components of the reflexive policy agenda into official local policy. In Tallinn, for example, the results of the process have led to the restructuring of national services for NEET youth, and the new service model has been co-created, tested, and validated by young people, thanks to the involvement of the municipality. And in Baracaldo, for example, the municipality and the youth office organized informative sessions about the benefits and allowances which are available for young people, and also a series of workshops for young people who want to go and live on their own, emancipation workshops. For example, they explained the ins and outs of rent versus owner occupation. However, let's say the most important results that we, from our experience for any co-creation process, is to achieve a change of mindset, where the necessity of participatory and co-creative approaches to policymaking becomes clear to the decision makers and the local administrators. So for us, the ultimate goal was to permanently embed a youth board or something similar into the existing policymaking structure. And in our experience, the key to this is to show institutional actors what is the value of co-creation. And the first benefit of this participatory approach, we think, is to foster a very much needed direct interaction between the decision makers on one hand and their policy target groups, in our case, young people. And from this interaction, local administrators can gain important knowledge and greater understanding of young people and their problems. And because reflexive policymaking is a cross-sectoral approach, it can also help to improve the cooperation between different institutional actors, so different departments of the same municipality or different institutions in the same city. And also, as Uswe already said, decision makers should learn. So one of the results, the benefits, is that decision makers should learn to listen more attentively to their target group and to their experiences, and they should become more open to alternative policy making approaches. And aside from, let's say, policy change, co-creation also has value per se for those who participate in it. In our case, for young people, because through this process, they've had the opportunity to learn new skills that they can use in other areas of their life. They've had the chance to get a better grasp of how the system functions, how the policy making functions, and they've also gained more confidence in their potential agency. And all of this led to an overall empowerment. So in the case of Uplift, we can say that the co-creation process was undeniably successful in terms of transforming the attitudes of both groups. And the fact that initiatives to continue with reflexive policymaking for young people are being pursued in all 4 locations is a clear testament to this success. So I think we can say that we planted a good seed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. I see there are 2 questions in the chat from Michelle de Bruyne, very interesting questions. I think the first question relates to Uswe's presentation, where she said, well, we need to do capacity building, not only on the side of the young people, but also on the side of the institutional stakeholders. But of course, the question is, how do you do that? How can you change the mindset of policymakers so that they become more receptive to the input of young people? Perhaps, Uswe, can you say a little bit more about that? Perhaps how you did that in the Baracaldo case?
Yes, thank you, Joris, and thank you, Michael, for your question. I think it's in our case in Baracaldo, there was a pre-existing condition of openness of the policymakers, right? I mean, they were very keen on starting a process of co-creation with youth. But I can give you one example in which when it happened, when was the time where they realized that bringing the young people to the table was really important and that could change policy making for the better? It was in the first session we had with young people and institutional stakeholders, where the young people prepared very thoughtful presentations on their diagnosis about how the young people in Baracaldo were living the inequality, housing inequality, which were their real problems. And they started to get to know that they didn't know about those issues before, that issue was very important, that they were presenting their diagnosis. So this is the time where they first realized how important it was for the policy co-creation process and for policy making in general to bring them and let them to have a more active role. So it was a very, very good question. So a very, very, very good moment in the process. So for that, it's very important that young people work on really bring to the table valuable inputs from their experiences. And that was something that happened in our co-creation process. I don't know if it's helpful for you or not.
Yeah, I think I would like to add to that indeed, of course, you can prepare stakeholders up front, but in the end, I think it's the quality of the process that should convince them. So if during the process and during the interactions with young people, they really see that these young people experience serious problems and they see that they come up with solutions that are really relevant and that could really help solving these problems, I think that's the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So you can have commitment up front, but it's very important, I think, to have a good co-creation process with good quality interaction that should really convince the the policymakers that it has an added value. And I think that's also the reason why in Uplift, yeah, we make it such an intensive process with capacity building, with the structural youth board, with many sessions, because I think that is the key to achieving good quality input from the youth board, at least in my view. I also see that Eva has raised her hand. Eva, muted already. Sorry, Eva, I was going to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Joris. I would have one question which just was raised recently by some local stakeholders. And this is about the heterogeneity of the target group. So how you can select the people you would like to work with, either the youth board or any kind of boards. So how you can select them and how you can work with them to acknowledge that they are very heterogeneous and their interests might be very heterogeneous. Because we try to think about how this methodology might be applied in different circumstances. For example, in case of, let's say, public tenants. So if we would like to create a board based on public tenants and to articulate their needs, we have to acknowledge that this is a very diverse target group and they have different interests. Some of them are more interested in keeping the status quo, while others might need changes in the system. And of course, these are sometimes against each other's interests. So the question is, if you would like to create a legacy to your youth board or to your board, and you are aware, or you would try to state that the outcome of the process is a valid one, and it represents, you know, the interest of certain target groups, and you would like to have a change in the system. How you can ensure that all the interests are properly represented in the process? So what were the methodologies that you can apply in this direction?
It's a good question, Eva. I'm not sure, does any of the speakers want to reply? How to deal with this?
Maybe I can say something, which is, so we have strived to make our boards as representative as possible, but the issue of diversity and representation is always a big one. So in the case, if we take the example of public tenants, I think this is it's a very good example. The moment you try to set up a participatory project or participatory process with public tenants, there is also a selection bias in the sense that those who are most unhappy, those who need most change, will probably be the ones participating the most. And also there is an issue of vulnerability, an issue of time, an issue of privilege. Not everyone will have the resources, mental or time, or also intellectual resources to take part in such a process. So this is always a problem. And I think being aware of this and trying to, let's say, recruit as many people as possible with as a diverse background as possible is the only thing we can do from a very practical level. And during the discussion, it's also important that, and also in the development of the suggestions and in the interaction, is important that we keep in mind that this is, however inclusive, it will always be by default, by design, a partial view, but it's, however partial, it's more, it includes more points of view, more perspectives than, let's say, the usual policy making, when not even these partial points of view are included. So I think it's something that we need to be aware of. It's a limitation that participatory processes have. I think it is intrinsic and can only be partially overcome. And being aware of this and trying to look for the unrepresented interests is the only thing we can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, for example, in Amsterdam, but also in the other locations, we particularly try to include people in the youth board. Well, not always easy, but from which we suspect that their voice was insufficiently heard in the current policy debate. For example, yeah, we did not aim for students because they have their own lobby organizations and they, to some extent, already have a voice in the process. I think also in Swantu and in Tallinn and also in Barakaldo, yeah, we really try to give a voice to the people that are now really underrepresented in the policy making process, like migrants or Roma population or unemployed youth, to particularly have their voice heard. But again, it's also very difficult to reach that group. So, but I think to a large extent we managed to get their voice included in the process, which I think it's very nice. Also keeping an eye on the time. I think there's one more question in the chat I would like to address before we have a brief break for collecting points for discussion, and that's the question of Anna, and I think it's particularly for Kerli about yeah, let's say the outcomes of the co-creation process in Tallinn. What kind of new services were created for the need youth, and yeah, how did it work out? So Kerli, can you please respond to the question of Anna in the chat?
Hello, Anna. Mostly the process was so that the young, during this co-creation and these young people needs, mostly they raised up the services that are offered them now, but it maybe there was several barriers for need use, and they gave their new input, how these services for example, career services or information services should be developed this way that they are useful for the young people. But the project is not so long that we can we already piloting them or make this intervention and now piloting it. So we are mostly in this process where we designed them according to the young people needs, and now the next process must go on. So also our brief information about these services also written also our short report. But mostly they are career services, all information services. We understood that, or listening the young people, that if they move to Tallinn, they don't get a lot of services because they are not yet the inhabitants of the Tallinn, and all this input is now co-created with the stakeholders. But it's long process, next process after this project.
Thank you very much, Kerli. It's nice to see that the discussion is already starting, but still I would propose to have a brief break until 20 minutes past 11. So you can take a coffee, but particularly I also would like to use the break to collect questions and issues for discussion in the chat. So if you have anything that comes to your mind after seeing our presentations, please add it in the chat, and then at 11:20 sharp we will start with the comments from Professor Gruijsteen, and after that, we will have hopefully a very nice and open discussion based on the issues that are raised in the chat. So let's take a brief break, and please don't forget to register comments and questions in the chat if you have any. Professor Steen from the University of Leuven. She's an expert in co-production, co-creation. She has seen our presentations. She has read some of our material, and yeah, we're really looking forward to hear what she thinks of it, what her reflections are. So, if you're ready, Professor Steen, I would like to give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you much. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this, because I must genuinely say it's a very interesting project you've done, very relevant socially, but also as an academic, there's a lot of insights to be learned from the different pilots you've run. I'll start with really saying pointing out a number of things that I really appreciate from the project, and then I also have some questions addressed to you. As I said, what I really appreciate is the attention. I mean, I see as an academic studying co-creation, there's a lot of work being done both in academia but also in practice on co-creation, and on co-creation with vulnerable persons, which has gained a lot of attention. But while we do know in practice that young people are one of the groups that are very difficult to engage with, there's not that much work actually done on this group. And so having this focus, working specifically with young people, engaging young people, and moreover also providing attention to the differences among these young people, and that they're not only young, but that there also are other vulnerabilities that might be combined. For example, having a difficult socioeconomic background, being from migrant populations, so avoiding to step into the downside of engaging with only well-off, high educated young people, for example. So that's and even that seeing to some extent also that in engaging with young people, it's not only about the local government, for example, and the youngsters, but that there's a lot of other stakeholders involved also, especially in the first presentation this morning. This was also shown. Another thing which I really liked and which I think is very important in co-creation is that, again, when we talk about co-creation, we provide a lot of attention to the citizens, in this sense, to the young people with whom we, our governments, want to collaborate. But co-creation, of course, is a two-way process. It's not only about engaging young people, it's also about having the professional side, the policymakers, the managers, the street level bureaucrats who interact with the young people, also have them engaged, have their support for these processes, but also having them taking up new role, adjusting their way of working within their professional roles. And again, this is something that I saw throughout the different projects appear. There's a lot of attention you provide on how to engage the young people, how to engage with the young people, but also that it has implications for that professional side also. And in that sense, also managing the processes, there's again a lot of attention for recruiting, engaging young people. But in the Uplift project, there was also a lot of attention provided for how do you actually manage these participatory initiatives, how you prepare, how you set up action plans, and ultimately the last presentation, for example, where does it lead to, what are the goals that we aim for, what ultimate value do you want to reach with co-creation. So in that sense, for me, it is really a valuable project, combining all these insights, all these perspectives, and testing them, you could say, in practice. But of course, as a discussant, as a critical discussant, there's also a number of questions that I have, or that it's in great part it's questions of getting a bit more deeper insights into what actually is being done. And as I've already indicated, a lot of the attention you provide rightfully is to how to recruit and how to keep engaged young people in co-creation. And the first aspect that I want to look at really relate to this. When I think about engaging people in co-creation, there's like 3 basic elements, you could say. The first one is motivating people, and how do you get the young people motivated to engage? A second one is ability. What capacities do young people need to be engaged, and how can we support that? And the second one is opportunity. So next to willingness and capacity to be engaged, there also has to be the opportunity, and that's more the professional side, of course. How do we provide opportunity to those young people to get engaged? And each of these 3 aspects I would briefly like to link with. The first one, in terms of motivation, of course, there's the salience of the topic, and having you've focused on very salient topics: housing, employment, education. And another element of getting people motivated, also where you've put a lot of attention on, is the trust. What we've learned, what I've learned from my previous work as a researcher, is that for people to engage with local government in co-creation processes, there must be what we call external efficacy, which means like there must be some level of trust that what I as a citizen provide as input, that government will actually do something with it. And so if you don't have that basic level of trust, and I saw that you provided a lot of attention to that, and also to engaging a wide group of people. But one of the challenges I've also seen is that even if you look at vulnerable people, the ones that you get engaged with are often the ones that already have a high level of trust. You talk about trust building, but is that a challenge that you encountered also, that even within these very specific vulnerable groups, it stays very difficult to engage with people with low level of trust? So it is difficult to increase trust in government and trust in institutions through co-creation, simply because the ones that co-create are the most trustful ones. So that's a bit of a first question or something to reflect on. A second one, in terms of ability, as I said, like next to motivation, there's also the ability and the capacity of young people to engage. And here comes the ease of engaging, of setting up projects. Self-efficacy is something important here. Self-efficacy relates to sort of the self-trust that people have. Do I think that I'm experienced enough? Do I think that I have the capacities to raise my voice, to go into a debate in a youth board, for example? And again, one of the things we learned is to diversify roles that people can take. For example, not everybody is confident in being able to engage in a debate. So the specific, and I saw that reflected in your projects also, for example, in the Amsterdam project, where you say like we have a small, stable and active group, and then a more bigger, less intensively involved group. But on the other hand, you focus very much on youth boards. And what I've learned is that there's more in participation beyond voice. So that again is a question. Then your focus on youth boards mainly, but do you see also chances for engaging with young people that are less comfortable with raising their voice, literally, but that you could engage with in other participatory ways? And it's the policy cycle is not only about co-designing and co-planning policies, but maybe also about co-delivering policies. So rather than having a voice, actually doing something might be something that some young people are more comfortable with than others. So that's a second question or something to reflect on. How diversified can you make the engagement of young people so that you address again, a very broad group of people, also the ones that feel less comfortable with raising their voice. And then the third one is opportunity. And so next to motivation, ability, opportunity. There, a question I have is, again, from research, we know that context is very important. The higher, for example, the community attachment within a neighborhood, the easier you get people involved, and also vulnerable groups, also young people. This is very much an informative question from my side. Did you, across the 4 pilots, or even across the, I think it were 16 areas that were part of the project, see this kind of differences, that some urban areas have a higher level generally of community attachment, and that it's easier, or did it not have that kind of impact on engaging with young people? And then maybe a last question, because I see my time is running out already. Our reflection is, beyond engaging with the people, what I liked very much, what I appreciate very much also is that you really look at what is the added value that we can aim for with this co-creation processes. And especially again in that last presentation, a lot of the discussion, the focus was on that. What you often see in co-creation processes is that they're limited in time. They have a short-term focus, and they want to have something specifically done. And then after that, it sort of slips away again. Of course, setting up a youth board, as you said, this is also something like, I mean, you definitely show that you have this in perspective. For example, by saying setting up a youth board is something that then should run for a longer time. So how can we support these youth boards to keep on functioning in the longer run? But also you pointed out, for example, there's one thing in changing policies, but getting them implemented takes a longer time. So that means that we have to keep an eye on that also for a long time. But one of the big challenges with co-creation is how to keep co-creation sustained over time. And with keeping them sustained over time, I mean, on the one hand, to make the processes sustainable over time. We engage people, and how do we make sure that it doesn't fall down again, and that we keep that participation, that we have capacity building in terms of engagement and participation in the long run, as well as how do we sustain the sort of the immediate outcomes of a specific project. How do you make sure that if you work with a group of young people, when you set up something of value, that if you look back 5 years later, and the youth will have changed also, because they're not youth anymore, so new people come in. How do you make sure that, for example, the community attachments, the community building that you have reached, that you can sustain that over time? And I think it's not a question easily to answer. The fact that you already provide attention to that, and that it's part of that you show that difference between short-term, long-term goals is already an important one for me. So that were some reflections from my side. I hope it's you can use this as input.
Thank you very much, Professor Steen. I think very, very useful remarks, really food for thought, food for discussion. Also, thank you very much for your words of appreciation for our project. I've understood that some members of the Romanian team will have to leave soon, but they would like to respond to some of your comments. I would like to give the floor first to Julia or Gabi, please.
Yes, Julia. Okay, so I try just to summarize and respond to your question, of course, not for all, but that's why we think when we work with very vulnerable groups to have a preparatory process. Because before the co-creation process, because when people are coming to our session, they are coming from a place of pain. About if we think, for example, discrimination, and they are very poor, or they don't go to school, or so on. And we never motivate the young people practically try to be a model as facilitators when we accept their life experiences, their thoughts, their, I don't know how to say, yes, experiences, and prepare a fair process when the other youngsters see how we can relate to their problems. So we never try to engage them. We practically try to offer a place when we accept their experience, their differences, and in this way, practically they see and try to, and they will do the same in the same way. And when we integrate in a way these experiences, what we saw that they are prepared after that to meet with the institution, because they have an integrated approach about their life experiences, and they can represent themselves in another way. And they are not so vulnerable when they meet with, I don't know, with the vice mayor or with the school directors and with the municipality. So that's why we believe in the preparatory process. I don't think that in every case we need it, but with very vulnerable youngs, this is our experiences that we prepare this fair process before with them. And we always accept if somebody wants to left. We have just a few cases because we think the engagement of the institution, but we don't, how to say, wait more from the youngster what they can give to the group, because some of them are working, have a very hard background in the families, and practically we value every presence and every decision what they took. But usually we don't have this problem. In this group we don't have this problem, but we have other experiences in other groups when of course the processes were more difficult than here, because the vulnerability was much more higher. So I don't know if I respond to you, but yes, the preparatory phase practically is to modeling a democratic space for the youngsters, with them to create this space together with them, how we integrate the different views, how to understand each other, how to put in the place maybe different ideas. And when they experience that their reality is counting, they are not so vulnerable when they go to at institutional level. They can accept, they can manage these differences, they can be in their place to practically raise their voice. And yeah, shortly.
Thank you very much, Julia. Yeah, I think it's a very good question of Trai. She, if I understood correctly, kind of asked about a risk of self-selection in the youth board, because perhaps the people that really do not trust the system do not see the added value of joining the youth board. And also, yeah, people that perhaps are less articulate in expressing their voice and want to contribute in another way, perhaps to policy making, may also feel less attraction. So I think, yeah, it's a very good comment. Yeah, perhaps Martina, do you want to respond to that, or do you have another question?
No, yeah, I wanted to respond to some of these things. So I think the engagement part is definitely the most interesting, and so I have a few responses to a few of the things that Professor Stein mentioned. So when it comes to let's say external efficacy and to the willingness and the motivation and building trust, I think that in our case, so what we tried to do with Uplift is that we had a lot of time, we had a lot of money, and we had, so we didn't have many of the constraints that local participatory projects have. So we could focus in a longer process. This took 3 years. So it's a very, compared to many other participatory processes, it's a very long one. What we tried to do was to use this advantage that we had as an experiment to increase the trust. So there was a lot of time that was spent into trying to reach people, into preparing the young people, what Julia just mentioned, that in some of the locations, the actual co-creation process didn't start like it didn't start before a year, because the first year was only about trying to reach and trying to engage the young people in the sense of making them trust that this process was not going to be an extractive one in which we ask something of them and then nothing comes back, something like that. So it was also about trying to build trust for people that did not have it in the institutions. So a lot of time was spent on that, and we could afford this because of the type of project that we had. We do recognize that this is not the usual in participatory processes. So this is definitely an issue of self-selection, like people that do not trust the system will not engage in participation. And then also I wanted to have a comment about the, let's say, the self-efficacy, about how did we diversify the roles that the young people could take, with an example from Amsterdam. So we had not only we had a youth pool of so a pool of young people that were engaged in a less consistent way, but also within the youth board there were clearly more confident people and people that were less comfortable with speaking up. So some of the people were more engaged when it came to interacting with the institutional stakeholders. So they were the ones presenting, and they were the ones, you know, really putting themselves out there. But then there were also a lot of other people that were more comfortable, let's say, in the shadow. But this doesn't mean that they did not engage in conversations when they had their own, let's say, private, protected space. So we had many meetings with only the young people and, let's say, the facilitators, the moderators and the facilitators, where institutional stakeholders were not there. So in those meetings, we also had, let's say, we had them do something that they were more comfortable with. For example, some of them carried out interviews to their peers to find out, okay, what are the problems that we do not see, that are beyond our own experience. They went out and carried out not only like in-depth interviews for the project, but also they went and looked for information from their peers about what are the most common housing problems. So there were possibilities to do different things. And in that sense, I think that it is part of creating an atmosphere of comfort and trust, where people feel comfortable, yes, speaking up and you know, expressing their voice, but also not necessarily do that. So that was one thing. And then about the capacity building and how do we make the process sustainable in the long term, I think that this is the question. Like, we had the possibility to spend a lot of time on this and to convince the institutions that took part in the project that this is valuable, but now it's sort of up to them. So it will inevitably become a different thing. It will be institutionalized. It will be a lot more, there will be a harder framework, probably shorter time, less money, but it will, we hope that it will have a life of its own, but it's not, it's not something that we can control. And I don't think that other than trying to convince institutions, local institutions, there is anything else we can do. Not very hopeful, but yeah.
Thank you, Martina, for sharing these thoughts with us. I see in the chat also that Christiana suggests that perhaps starting small with a micro level project can be a first step towards trust building. Perhaps can you explain a bit more what you mean by that, Christiana, and what kind of micro level projects we could think of?
Yes, I could. What we were discussing in Chemnitz was that in the Eurocities project, as just one example, but they refer to the international experience at this point, was that they hardly ever managed to include NEET people or other vulnerable groups of young people into the public planning processes participation, for example. That if at all they reach them for very small micro level projects in their neighborhood, like designing your next skating area or designing your next playground. And they thought that this is the only level where you can reach young people in vulnerable conditions. And that never ever they could have a position in youth boards on the, let's say, municipal level, or on a decision-making level, even in the youth department's gremia. And I tried to counter this argument with saying, okay, they have maybe a bad experience with all the institutions, like it was discussed and presented in the Uplift experience so far. But that the first step could be to involve them on that level, and then slowly, step by step, as again presented here by the Uplift colleagues, use these projects as door opener for the upper, I would say, upper level decision-making levels or institutions. Yeah, and it was rather a comment than a question, because it somehow mirrored that. In my perception, it's more the institutions that are not open or not prepared to really accept or be interested in the voice of the people targeted with their policies.
Yeah, perhaps in that respect, I think the process in Baracaldo is a very interesting one, because it started with a municipality that, even though they were project partners, was not very receptive to the project. Well, there were all kinds of reasons for that, but it's, yeah, over time they actually became very enthusiastic about Uplift and working with the youth board and reflexive policy making. So perhaps Claudia or Ursula, you can tell a bit more about it. What do you see as kind of key to getting municipalities committed to these processes and make them enthusiastic about it? Because that's really what you have experienced in your own city.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think that following up the things raised by Professor Steen, it's important that what we observed and we saw in our co-creation process is that both universities and policymakers, we are very far from these people we want to reach, especially the most vulnerable people, really, really far. So the strategy we followed was, I think it's a very interesting strategy, is to identify those institutions that are working on a daily basis with the most vulnerable people. So in this regard, the last question you raised was about how the context is we have this community approach or not. What we saw in Baracaldo is that all the many like vulnerable collective group of people, they belong to different associations in here. And so it's a very extensive associative fabric within the city, and especially when it comes to migrant people, young migrant people. So, for example, we were in touch with this association of Berebere people, which are some a tribe or a group of ethnic group from the northern part of Africa. And so they were associated, they were already working on a community basis. So it was very important that the Baracaldo municipality, the main institution, was in touch with this association. So the way they approached these people was through this association in which they trust. So that was a key point to take into our minds, or to keep for the future policy co-creation that might be replicating in Baracaldo. So, and I think that it touches very, very deeply into the trust building aspect. Whether these young people trust or not on institutions, because they don't even know. I mean, these people weren't aware about what institutions are in the city. I mean, they were very far from there. So they approach the institutions through this association in which they trust, because they provide support, advice on a daily basis. They know each other from the personal in their personal lives. So that was a really, really important point for us. And I think it was one of the key success aspects. Do you think, do you agree, Claudia? Maybe you want to say something on that.
Please,
Yeah,
Claudia.
Yes.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
No?
Yes.
Okay. So I also think that, as Yoris and us were saying, the Baracaldo case is a good example of how working with different stakeholders within the same municipality can make the difference. No, at the beginning we were working with some policymakers as our main people of reference in the municipality that were not seeing the project that much. No, so when we engaged these new policymakers from the youth department, they started like trusting the process, and they started being more engaged. So in this sense, maybe what it is interesting for the process to be more sustainable, it is not that much how good are the solutions or how good is the project, because at the end of the day, maybe the policymakers will change, and maybe the new ones have new priorities with new ways of thinking, and that's not bad. But what it is true that to the extent that we try to in some sense bring or create new capabilities on the people that are part of the municipality, and in a way trying to change like the culture of the municipality and the way of seeing how they see participation, that can definitely make a difference. Because maybe when a new team comes with new priorities, if there's this kind of culture in the municipality, maybe the new people with new priorities will bring new projects, but the logics behind those projects can also be participatory. So maybe that can make a difference in terms of sustainability of the process, no? And also, responding to Martina's question on the chat, she was talking about this kind of conflicting positions within the youngsters. And I think Baracaldo is a good case of that, because we are working with migrant people, but also with people from the municipality. So in our case, one thing that was quite interesting is that we were working on the one hand just with the young people, and then we had another space in which young people were meeting with the policymakers. So what we were doing in that group of just young people was to agree what do we want to bring to the policymakers team, no? So there, with our facilitation, like we were the facilitators of those spaces in which young people agree and bargain in some sense, no? What they want to bring to the policymakers. So when they go to the policymakers, they have one position as young people, but this position as young people, like in some sense reflects the realities of all the people that are part of this young group, no? So in that sense, that's like easier for the policymakers there, because they, like the young people, bring like one position as young people, no, but that at the same time is reflecting those realities. And there, like, how to reflect the realities of all those people, that's quite complicated, because also there are like power relations there. It is not the same in terms of language, for example. The people who are from Baracaldo definitely have like more power because they understand better the language and they can express better. So there, the role of the facilitators is key in order to guarantee that all people can, in some sense, bring their opinions and realities to the process. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I also see an interesting discussion in the chat. It's about the follow-up and the sustainability of, let's say, working with the youth board and working in the way we did in the Uplift project. Of course, Martina rightfully has indicated, yeah, this was a unique chance to work like this. We had the money, we had the time, and of course, municipalities cannot just copy that. But what we do see is that quite a lot of municipalities in different European countries, they do have, for example, a youth council, a board or a council of young people that gives advice to the municipality. So the question is, yeah, to what extent can that add or can that act as a substitute for Uplift, or is it something completely different and something much more institutionalized that is not comparable with what we did in the Uplift project? So yeah, I'm just curious to know, perhaps also from Professor Steen, if you know other ways in which young people can be involved in policy making that are perhaps less time and budget intensive than we did in Uplift, while at the same time still keeping, let's say, yeah, really the added value of what we did in terms of engaging young people, changing mindsets of stakeholders, generating trust, etc., etc. So briefly speaking, can we do the same thing, but in a lighter version, so that it becomes more feasible, perhaps for municipalities that do not have budgets as we did in the project? It's an open question for everyone, but perhaps first, Professor Steen, I'm not sure if you have any ideas about this.
Yeah, well, I think in a lot of cities and local governments, you indeed have something that is a bit alike at the youth boards, and it might differ in extent to how much they are engaged with. But for example, what you also see, but I've saw that a bit in this Uplift project also, that next to the youth board, having more smaller ad hoc initiatives where youngsters can link with. And because, for example, because the youth board takes some initiatives and then asks specifically for youngsters to help there. And if it's something about skating or something about a small festival being organized and engaging people in that way, just for one time, for example, it might be short-term intensively or even short-term but not that intense, as to broaden the group of young people with whom they engage. And so I think that's something. What I've also seen is, you see in a lot of local governments these days, the idea of participatory budgeting, and that they put, sometimes it's a very small amount, something that's quite substantive of the local government budget, open to projects and proposals by citizens. And in some, there's really been a focus also on getting project proposals of young people on how to spend a limited amount of for example, then you see projects again in recreation areas and more specifically directed to young people, or open classes I've seen as an example, also facilitating these. Or often you see, and then a last example maybe is there's a lot of, especially in more urban areas, in formerly industrialized sites, there's a lot of like open or temporary use of abandoned spaces, because the cities don't like abandoned spaces because that leads to vandalism, and at the same time they can use these spaces for because they're often in as I said, industrialized or formerly industrialized areas where there's now a lot of people with a more vulnerable background living, for example, and using these spaces to set up small scale initiatives to invite young people, really young people to engage with them. That's something I've seen also. And maybe if I might, what I in the chat is the last comment by Eva. It's something quite different, but it's also very interesting where she said like the mirroring the issues. That's something I would like to comment also on, because again, I appreciate very much that you talk a lot about the trust building, how to build the trust in order to engage people. You've also talked about that capacity building. That was even in the pool, the question, that it has to be from both sides, the building trust among the youngsters, but also building trust among the professionals to engage with. But I think that is something that should really deserve more attention, and it's on the capacity building on the side of the policy implementers. It is about trust, trusting the users, trusting the young people here, trusting their expertise as young people themselves. But it's beyond that. It's also building capacities among those professionals who've been used to seeing themselves as, I'm a professional, I have the training to know what is best, but I don't have the training to do it in different ways, to collaborate, to coach young people and learn from that what is the best thing to do from us. So I think it's not only about two-sided trust building, but it's also about capacity building in very different ways, also on the professional side.
Thank you very much for these comments, Trui. I think, yeah, we also experienced in Amsterdam, but also in other locations, that a key to trust building is also direct interaction between professionals and young people. They are really separate worlds. And what we tried, for example, in Amsterdam was to organize lunches with young people and the professionals, so the professionals could talk about their work, young people could ask questions, and then they already establish a personal contact. And then, yeah, I think once there is personal contact and they know each other, they know a little bit about each other's worlds, everything becomes a little bit easier already. So I think, yeah, finding creative ways of stimulating interaction between young people and professional stakeholders, which is not always easy, because most professional stakeholders tend to have very busy agendas. But I think that is a first step into the trust building process. I really think that's a key condition for those co-creation projects to be successful, is that there is sufficient trust on both sides. And yeah, we try to establish that in kind of a big way with extensive projects such as Uplift, but I think perhaps smaller micro projects can also contribute to that. And if they are successful, perhaps they open up the way for bigger projects. So that's also kind of a reply to Eva's comment in the chat. I think, of course, it's, yeah, the way we did it, I think it's the nicest way to start with high ambitions to really make a difference in the field of housing or education or employment. But again, yeah, we had time, we had money, and if that's not there, I still think small micro projects can make a difference as well, in terms that they, yeah, also what Christiana said, can make perhaps a kickstart in bridging the gap between young people and policymakers, and starting some trust building between them. And if they are successful, perhaps, yeah, other bigger follow-up co-creation projects will follow. So I think it's very much also context dependent. It's past 12 already, so I don't want to take much more of your precious time. Perhaps is there a last burning comment or question from any of the participants? I would give to
Maybe someone from the audience.
Yeah,
didn't speak yet. Well, apparently not.
If not, then I would like to thank all the participants, and particularly Professor Steen and the speakers for the participation. I think it was a very interesting session. So thank you all, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I think.
All right. It's just the two of us.
Yeah, went well, I think, in terms of quality of the conversation. I think it was higher than the VP3 meeting, like more engagement. I think that choosing to have a discussant is a good idea.
Yeah, this was a very good discussant. I think.
Yeah.
So happy to have her.
Yeah, she was really good.
Yeah, I think
very-
we should send her an email afterwards to thank her again, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I should stop recording.
Yeah, I'm not sure what